welcome to Lunchtime BABLing. My name is Shea Brown. I'm the CEO of BABL AI, a company that audits algorithms for bias, ethical risk, and good governance. So today I'm going to be discussing a couple of different things, two in particular, and both of these are initiatives that have been launched through what we call the Algorithmic Bias Lab. So BABL AI is a consulting firm and algorithmic auditing firm working with clients, but all of us who work, most of us who work at BABL are academics, and so we research and we publish on algorithmic bias, on risk assessments, on AI ethics, and also other things. So for instance, I have a PhD in astrophysics, so I also publish papers in astrophysics. We have a lot of philosophers, epistemologists, things like this. So we can't help ourselves to do research, and so we kind of formed this arm of BABL AI called the Algorithmic Bias Lab. And that's where we put all of our research and education efforts, because the majority of us are educators, are professors, working at various universities. And so everything that we do related to the core focus of BABL, which is AI ethics and auditing, and essentially promoting human flourishing in the age of AI. Any of the work that we do, we kind of put in the Algorithmic Bias Lab. So a lot of what we do, happens there as well. So there are two initiatives that I want to talk about. The first is a recent report which we just released, and I just want to talk through it. Again, this is always a very informal webinar. I don't even want to call it a webinar. This is literally me just chatting most of the time. So I'm just going to walk through that report. Then I want to talk about something that we're starting, which is a new program for training our own internal auditors, and which we have kind of made the decision. I talked about it last week, or maybe it was the week before, and I wasn't sure whether we were going to release it and actually offer it and allow other people to take these courses. And I think we're going to do it. And so I want to kind of step through that process and what the courses are going to look like. And then maybe if Jihao's around, we can have a conversation about auditing in general afterwards. So as always, if you are listening and you want to ask us a question, then please put a question in the Q&A. I'm always happy. Otherwise, I will continue to babble. So you can direct my babbling by putting questions in the Q&A, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Okay, so what I'm going to do is let me before I screen share and look at the report, let me talk a little bit about this project. And the name of the report is called "The Current State of AI Governance." And it sounds very sweeping and grandiose in some sense, but we had a very simple question that we wanted to answer. There's been a lot of initiatives, there's been a lot of guidance on how to govern AI. And if you've been following this field, I think most people who listen to this are either involved in this field or have followed this field, you'll know that the rate at which guidance and white papers and frameworks coming out has just increased exponentially over the years. So 5 years ago, when BABL started, there was some, if a white paper came out with somebody talking about this, it was a big deal, and we'd pour through it and look at it and think about how to operationalize it and all of that stuff. Now there's so many that it's almost noise. It's almost white noise of these sort of guidance. So what we were interested in doing is to just approach this empirically and really just get out there and try to figure out how many of these initiatives are actually working, what kind of initiatives are out there, because there's a whole array of different things that you can do as an organization to try to govern the way you develop, deploy, monitor these AI tools to make sure that they protect humans. And so which one of those are working? And so we were lucky enough to get a grant from the Notre Dame IBM Tech Ethics Lab to do this. because of course this is not part of our consulting work. This is just independent research that we wanted. It of course informs our consulting work, and our consulting work has informed this report significantly. So let me share my screen and just show you what we've done, the current state of AI governance. And so essentially what we did is we went and talked to people. And so we did this in two different ways. We did it through a survey, which we submitted mostly to either people who we knew and tried to spread the word, or we blasted it on LinkedIn and tried to get the word out there, and try to get as many people as we can to answer this survey. And then the next was actual interviews. And for this, it was a lot more, either people who answered the survey, we had an option for them to come talk to us, or they contacted us via LinkedIn, or we reached out to people we knew were working on this sort of thing. And we did sort of in-depth interviews and talked through their AI governance, if they had AI governance. And what this, the survey found is that less than half actually organizations that responded to this actually had started any AI governance initiatives, which is not surprising. That's definitely an upper limit, because I think it was a self-selected group, people who we were in contact with, or had relationships with, or saw our content on LinkedIn or Twitter. These are people who likely are already interested in AI and would potentially be thinking about these sorts of things. So I think that's an upper limit, this sort of 50% mark. So, and then we had the people that were actually doing AI governance, we went and interviewed them and talked to them. And so we have the executive summary here. And one of the things, so I'm not going to go through this entire thing, because I don't think it's better to read the report, and I'm not going to do a great job. And given how busy I am, I didn't put together a nice PowerPoint presentation on this. So my apologies if people were expecting a nice walkthrough of the results. But I will highlight a few things which I think are interesting. Everybody we talked to, and let me have a caveat here. We avoided on purpose talking to the largest enterprises that we knew were working on this, because what we didn't want to be skewed by the really big, robust I'm going to put robust in quotes, the big organizations that already have AI ethics or AI governance principles in practice and are very, very vocal about it. So we're talking about Google, Microsoft, Meta, those kind of organizations, Salesforce. We did not go talk to them because we weren't interested necessarily at this point in getting a sense of what they were doing, because they were already putting out everything that they were doing, anything that and I'm also skeptical that some of that is not 100% accurate of what they're actually doing. And I won't comment further on that, why I think that, but in any case, we avoided talking to those. We talked to other people who were not quite so vocal, also very large companies and very small companies, and everywhere in between. And what we found of those organizations, pretty much everybody is in this institutional implementation and design phase. So we have this, there are lots of different ways you can slice and dice maturity in this space. The way we did it, the way that seemed obvious to us in a very kind of gross way, is people who are thinking about frameworks. There are people who aren't doing anything, so that would be over on the left-hand side. But people who are thinking about frameworks, what are the frameworks we want to implement? And this, when we say frameworks, this is very, very loose term. They might have a set of principles that they're interested in thinking about, like fairness or transparency. This is sort of 5 years ago was the state of the art of what people are publishing. And then there's actual phase of trying to institutionalize this, implement this within their organization. That's where pretty much everybody is. And we didn't find anybody who actually had this robust, mature, where they actually had metrics of success. And when I say metrics of success, I literally mean anything that it would be a key performance indicator for whether the mechanisms that they put in place are actually working. So there are some people who had talked about things, very simple things like coverage, like how many projects actually had done a risk assessment, or how many people had actually followed through with this particular documentation that was planned to be standardized. Things like coverage was about as advanced as it got. And so actually settling on what are the right kind of metrics. And you can imagine this is not an easy task, because one of the obvious metrics might be, not getting in trouble, or not getting sued for things, or not having a regulator or some sort of reputational scandal. That's very hard to work with the sort of counterfactual there. And so coming up with a robust metric that might be a proxy for avoiding those sorts of things or those sorts of problems, or harming people in some way, is a difficult thing to come up with. So people had ideas, people were working on it, but almost everybody was still in this phase of really implementing what they were doing. Okay, so here's the executive summary. We have a few things that we highlighted that were kind of big, and so there's a lot more in the report later on, but we took kind of the things that we thought were really stood out, meaning there was a theme that was appearing as we were talking to people. And some of these are more important and some are less important. So the numbering does not indicate importance. So for instance, repositories and inventories is not that important for small and medium-sized enterprises. Although it was a recurring theme for the enterprise people that we talked to, where you have what some of them called a federated response, where you have the central responsible AI kind of core group of people, and then you have lots of products underneath it, and this core team is responsible for setting standards, best practices. They get disseminated, and it's a responsibility of sort of individual units to implement that. And in that process, everybody really highlighted the importance of having some sort of inventory or repository and the challenges associated with that. So that was one thing. Risk assessments were universally pointed out as being really critical, and not everybody had implemented risk assessments. Let me be clear about that. Many of them, in most of them, had not actually fully implemented some risk assessment process. All of them highlighted the importance, and many of them were in the phase of actually trying to build it out and thinking about the difficulties, and this is one of the things that a lot of people complained about, the difficulty of how do you take something which is intrinsic, a very difficult process. I mean, we do risk assessments at BABL all the time. They're very laborious. To do it right, you have to go talk to people. You have to really look at the socio-technical system. It's not just a technical thing. And it takes a lot of cross-functional expertise. And so how do you boil that down into essentially what would be like a survey or some sort of standard template, which would surface things that could potentially be risky? So anyway, that was another one that was pretty important. Difficulty in finding employees with the right skills. A lot of people talked about this. So this is a very new field, both AI ethics and AI governance. There are a lot of people who are sort of adjacent fields like compliance or privacy, who have a lot of the skills, but then there's a lot of missing skills as well. And this sort of feeds into some of the stuff I'll talk about later in terms of the training. So finding employees with the right skills is really, really important. And there actually was a surprising number of discussions of exactly the kind of things we've been thinking about. Is it better to take people who have some data science skills, who can really understand the technology, and train them for more ethics and compliance or governance kind of skills, or do you take sort of those ethics, compliance, legal people or product people and train them in AI enough that they can recognize potential risk? And it's not clear which one of those two is better or easier. And I mean, I don't have an opinion on it either. I think we've tried both, and both are difficult, or at least time consuming. So that's another one. So do I want to go through all of these? Let me see. Significant difference between the maturity between SMEs and large enterprises. This is not surprising, but the larger the organization, the more mature they were in terms of their thinking of this. That's just a resource issue mostly, but also I think an exposure to reputational risk or compliance risk issue. I think the larger organizations are much more low-hanging fruit for regulators and or reporters, and so they several of them had already had close calls, let's say, with reputational risk, and so they were much more tuned in to this need. Number 5 is an important one, which has come up a lot in other research that has been done, even I think at the Algorithmic Justice League, which sounds very much like the Algorithmic Bias Lab. That was unintentional, but the Algorithmic Justice League did some research, and others, I may be forgetting it, but about external stakeholder engagement. And while most people, if you ask them about it, or even if you don't, recognize the importance of this. So what I mean by that is, I'm building a tool that is going to used in hiring. Have I gone out and talked to people in the community or people who might be job candidates and sort of try to engage with what their worries about these tools might be? That's just one example. Everybody admits that that's a really important thing to do when you're trying to assess risk, and but nobody's really doing it in a way that's sort of robust and repeatable and not sort of just ad hoc. I mean, most people are not doing it at all, but it's a difficult thing to do, to try to reach out to those communities, and so there really is a lack of stakeholder engagement. That was pretty universal. Also fairly universal was the AI governance was seen mostly as a compliance issue. So it really was, there were a few companies that it was pretty core to what their mission. And we had reached out to those companies sort of because of that, because they had signaled that. But a lot of the other ones, it was seen as a compliance issue. And they also reported that internally, when they're in dealing with internal stakeholders, they see it as, those internal stakeholders see it as compliance issues. And that was a barrier actually to trying to get things done. Different reasons for adopting AI governance structures. So this just means people came to this for a variety of reasons. They might have gotten sued. They might have had some reputational scandal. They might have recognized the law that was approaching that they needed to worry about. Sometimes it was very individual driven, like where there was a particular person that came into the C-suite that had this as on their mind as an important issue, or even lower up from the bottom up, there were some developers that really cared about this issue and that sort of got the ball rolling. So it was a pretty wide range of different ways in which people got into this. Another theme that came up that was really interesting, and I think it kind of validates what a lot of us, because a lot of us also have worked on sort of ethical culture transformations in organizations, not myself, but other people in BABL. And it turns out a lot of people commented on culture being pretty central to the uptake of these initiatives. And so companies where it had really been, these sort of things had been inculcated in a lot of the culture of the company, it was much easier to get people to engage and actually do it. Whereas companies that didn't have this prevalence of these sort of risk mindset or worried about ethics, it was difficult to get these initiatives off the ground. So culture was a big a big point here that that a lot of people pointed out. AI governance sits in a range of functions. That was another thing. It wasn't just, I mean, later on we say that, that about half of them were, let me go down to the graphic here. Yeah, about half of the efforts were led by sort of an AI ethics officer or some equivalent person that has a title like that. But the other half were of these initiatives really came from all over the place. They were led by, in some cases, the office of the general counsel. Sometimes there was a compliance function that did it. Other times it was the product owners themselves. So the product managers were the ones that were kind of running these governance initiatives. Sometimes it was a C-suite. So there was a range of different places where this sat, which was interesting and probably not surprising. And then no clear metrics were emerging. And so this is what I was talking about before. How do you measure whether what some initiative you have is actually being effective? And so there are individual metrics that people will follow. So for instance, it might be that they're tracking bias in their tool. That is a governance intervention, this sort of ongoing monitoring. Or they might be doing risk assessments, or they might be mandating some sort of standard documentation, like a transparency statement or a data sheet or a model card or something like this. Those things you could track, but tracking this is the meta point of tracking the effectiveness of those for achieving the aims. And the aims, of course, have to be articulated. What are you trying to get out of the AI governance initiative? And though that kind of thinking has not fully matured. That's an understatement. People aren't quite there yet, partly because it's really difficult. But in any case, these are just a few of the things that we highlighted. And so here's the report. Here's the list, for instance. Sorry for the scrolling list of kind of the tools that when people asked, these were sort of gathered through literature review. And then if people ask, what do you mean by AI governance? We sort of offered up some of these. So it could anything from like particular roles to some sort of policies or procedures or training and that sort of thing. I want to quickly scroll down to, the team did a really good job. This was not led by myself. I took part in interviews and I sort of tried to gather as many people as possible to get into this, but the team did a really good job. And Jovana, who's our chief ethics officer, she's sort of did interviews, and she's also the lead author on this. And then most of these people are academics, or at least the Kwa is our data scientist and super smart, and worked on the survey with us. And so this was a year-long project, and it took us way longer than we should have to get this done. But we really wanted, interviews trickled in, and we wanted to get it right and try to get some convergence on some of the key issues. But I do want to point out this is just the beginning, because we haven't fully. The whole point of the project was to see what works. And if I go to, let's see if I even have this here. No, I don't have it. I think it's one of these. Yeah, okay. So this is the proposal where we got, or this is the webpage where we got the award. The main goal of this project was to actually identify which one of these might be more or less effective, or at least the perception that they're more or less effective. And we're not there yet. And people were not at the stage where they had that kind of information. And so we're going to continue this project, and essentially we're going to try to talk to more people. It's not funded by them anymore, but we're going to fund it ourselves, and we're just going to talk to more people and then follow up with the people that we've talked to. So really try to track over time whether they have any sort of insights as to which of these initiatives that they have taken part in has actually yielded some success. So one question is, do you have companies and organizations from the EU in the survey? The answer is yes. So definitely in the survey. In the interviews, we talked to Let me see. We did talk to a few European institutions, like that were based in Europe, and then there were many that were international, but based in the United States. So it's skewed, I think, towards the American side. So we didn't break out those demographics. We probably should have. So it is skewed towards the US and Canada. But I will say that I've talked to a lot of European institutions and European companies in my consulting capacity, and I feel like they're not much further along. Now, if you get some Europeans out there who want to tell me differently, please put in the Q&A. But from the people that I've talked to, the organization I've talked to, and both large and small, they are also still struggling with understanding how to implement all of the various controls. So even though the EU AI Act, for instance, is approaching, and there is a huge number of requirements which are very specific to AI governance in the EU AI Act, a lot of organizations in Europe that I talk to are not have not matured into actually getting those implemented. So I would be curious to hear if people have different experiences of that. But that's been my experience. This may change rapidly because things like the EU AI Act are approaching very quickly, and a lot of the sort of enforcement actions around GDPR and locally, like look at what happening in the Netherlands, for instance. I think that there's going to be a pretty rapid uptick in people actually trying to get this done. So yes, I have a question about, you come across any mention of internal auditors or independent risk assurance getting involved in AI governance? So the answer is kind of complicated. The answer is yes, but the people that we talk to where the internal auditors or the risk people were involved, they were not doing very much beyond what they so I think the answer is no. So let me put it this way. Several people did talk about or mention the internal auditing of and the risk assessment and some of the auditing around in the compliance function needed to get involved. They were aware of that. I don't think anybody expressed that they were involved in any meaningful way. So, and I've talked to personally, outside of this report, I've talked to internal auditors who are interested in getting into this, but currently there's a serious mismatch between like enterprise risk management, for instance. So I'm conflating internal auditing sort of on the financial side and risk management. So there's not a perfect overlap there, but enterprise risk management people, for instance, have expressed that they would really be interested in this sort of thing, and it is clearly a part of enterprise risk management, or it should be. But from what I can tell from the people that I've talked to, it's not there yet in terms of there isn't a sort of wholehearted shift of a particular risk management or internal audit division. I haven't heard of them totally subsuming this process. That may not be helpful, but anyway, that was my experience. So people have talked about it, but I haven't seen anybody say, yeah, AI governance is now part of our either internal audit or risk management divisions. A good question. So anyway, keep these coming because I definitely love questions. So so let me follow up with So let me first say, let me get back down here. Let me first say that we do have there's more to this report, and for companies that are just trying to start out, we have sort of like some real practical guidance on, and some of you might have seen me post versions of this on LinkedIn, because these came out even before the report, even though they were informed by this research. You know, for organizations who are just starting out, we have sort of like a bit of a workflow for like, what are the key things we think you just got to get in place first. And this is a people-powered process. So the very first thing is sort of getting, you know, if I were to put this in a temporal order, assemble a cross-functional committee, like get a person in charge and get that person to get a cross-functional team, a committee together that's going to deliberate on this process. And then from there, you get to establish principles. You have to know what you're optimizing for. So, you know, I think values, corporate values, and just values in general for your organization are going to lead to principles. And those principles are going to lead to certain commitments that you think you have in regards to your use of AI. And then those commitments have to be operationalized and upheld. That's the way it has to proceed. I think otherwise it's going to be this very ad hoc thing that is you're just going to play whack-a-mole. And so that has to happen. So get the people, get the principles, know what you're actually trying to do, gather an inventory of everything that you're doing. So where are you using AI? Figure that out. You know, get some tooling around making this thing versioned, visible, and accessible to that committee, so that you can see what's being used, and then just start deploying some principles. And we have in some other documents, we have a whole list of policies and procedures that you might pick from that might be useful. Things like standard documentation, or what kind of triggers do you have for risk assessments based on changes in your system and things like this. So any case, I'm going to stop there. So let me ask, so you can go get this at our website. We have a blog post. You can find it on LinkedIn. And importantly, if you have questions or comments, please contact me. Feel free to reach out to me. And if you want to talk more about this, or if you have some AI governance initiatives happening in your organization, even better, if you want to sort of share some insights with us, we are going to continue this project, because I think it's important for us to really understand which of these are working. Are there new ones we're not thinking of? And how do we sort of start converging as opposed to diverging with these initiatives? Now I'm going to move on to training of auditors. And so I think this is something I've talked about quite a bit before, because I've really struggled with this. And as you can see from the research, a lot of people are struggling with this issue of finding and training people to do the kind of work that is required by these AI governance. And auditing is sort of one mechanism, or it reflects a lot of those mechanisms. And so we've had this thought, you know, how are we going to train new people as they come in? And the same kind of questions, like, can you train someone who has a degree in the humanities or social sciences or law, the soft disciplines, let's call it that, on appropriate sort of understanding of AI in order to assess risk in the right way? Or do you take developers and you try to upskill them? What's the best pathway? Is there a best pathway? It probably depends on the person. And so this is where we're at. So we're now auditing people. So we're auditing people for New York City Local Law 144. The Digital Services Act is coming along very soon, and that is requiring auditing. I've talked many times on this channel about the various laws that are coming into place where auditing is being highlighted. Even the FTC has said, you know, bring in external experts to audit your systems, right? And so this is clearly going to be a big industry. We are working on this, and we're growing. And we have to think about how we ensure that our auditors have the right capabilities to do what they need to do in order to, particularly recognizing risk is an important issue. So we've come up with a lot of training material within our organization, mostly in the form of like presentations that we put together, or documentation for best practices that we put together, or repositories of standards or different procedures that we've put together. And now we need to think about, how do we package this for a new person, because this is all internal to our team. How do we package it for a new auditor to come in and actually be capable of executing these audits, whether it be a contract auditor or a staff auditor? And so we've been thinking about this process for quite a while, and now we're thinking that potentially this would be something that's useful for other people. What we're going to do is we're going to have an AI and algorithm auditor certificate program. So let me step back for a second. What we're doing first and foremost is we are putting together training modules or training for our team. So a lot of what we have done and learned and through working with our team over the past 5 years has we are now sort of coalescing into a lot more formal training, and we want to certify our own team internally on certain aspects of the job that they need in order to be effective algorithm auditors. And on top of that, so there will be an actual certification for our people, and anybody that we hire coming in or people that contract with us, this will be training that they have to go through and they have to have. And so there will be certification exams in 5 topic areas, and I'll show you those 5 areas in a second. I think that we should offer these to other people. And so the certification is for us, our internal people, but we want to offer these as a certificate program, which means you get a certificate of participation for taking these courses and learning these skills. I have to say that I've gotten some pushback internally that we shouldn't do this. Partly, there are several reasons. So let me articulate some of the worries that people have about this internally. Part of it is, why are we training our competition? And that's a valid point. However, I think that there is going to be so many algorithms that need to get audited with all of these laws that it's kind of ridiculous to think that we're going to capture even a tiny fraction of that market. Like, I'll be totally honest, we're not a huge firm. You know, I believe in our expertise. I believe in the work that we've done. I think we're pioneering in a lot of the stuff that we've done. However, we're not one of the big 4. And as soon as the big 4 fully get their sights on this, it's probably going to be game over for a lot of this, in terms of they're going to capture a huge part of the market. And so it's kind of unrealistic to think that we're going to that training our competition is actually a problem. I think we need lots of auditors. There needs to be other people, because we also do consulting, and if we consult with somebody, we can't audit them, period. That's against independence rules that we sign when we that we adhere to. It's part of our policies. And so if we still want to do consulting, which actually frankly pays more, then we can't audit those people. So there has to be auditors who can audit those people. And so it makes sense to share. That's my argument. Another worry that some of our team has had is that that we shouldn't be offering this sort of thing. So in the sense that, like, I'm the CEO, I'm a professor, I'm pretty busy. Why would I be sinking my time into offering this training to everybody? Let's just focus on our people. And I think there's a lot of merit in that, in the sense that clearly I'm busy enough that I can't put a presentation together for these meetings. However, I think this is really, in my mind, this is something that's super critical that we get right. And so it's worth my effort to get it right, even if it's just for our internal people, because we've submitted comments to the European Commission on the Digital Services Act. And in those comments, we highlighted that there are lots of current standards out there which we think are good, and we talked about how they should be adopted and changed. And then we emphasized new challenges. And the new challenges we emphasized are that this is not like other kinds of auditing. The complexity of the systems, especially for the Digital Services Act, where you have very vast socio-technical systems, which are highly complex, you have to have domain expertise in lots of different areas to be the auditor. You can't just say, take an auditor who knows how to do audit or assurance in like regulatory assurance for other fields and bring them in and expect them to audit. They have to be able to recognize the risks associated with this. And so we kind of have to practice what we preach in the sense that we need to actually train people on this. So there's a couple of questions, and let me pause here for a second. Is the lack of current corporate large-scale demand for AI auditors a barrier in investing in upskilling and training sufficient number of AI auditors? There's often concern on how long it will take this skills to pay back. Absolutely. So this is another worry that we have. It's not like there's a huge demand for AI auditors at this moment. And so you could ask yourself, would we train a bunch of people who aren't going to use those skills? And I think that's a valid worry. However, when I show you the skills that we think are required for AI auditing, these are skills that are going to be required within companies anyway, because we've seen the lack of training that we just mentioned to find people that have the skills to do risk assessments, who understand AI governance, who understand the legal aspects, who understand the testing and the AI. And so these are all skills, the subject matter skills that we're trying to teach the auditors, not necessarily the auditing skills per se. Those are going to be in demand. And so I do not think that they're not going to pay. I don't think that they won't pay off until there's a huge demand for auditors. I think there's a huge demand right now for people with those skills. And if you can demonstrate those skills, you can use those in companies right now. So that's my one caveat to that. Although it's still a worry with anything, any kind of new field, do you want to be getting into it too early before it's actually going to be useful? But I don't think that's the case in this case. Another question is governance for the audits. Who is to audit the auditor's work? Which standards to apply for auditing? It means auditors should be aware of all major standards, ? And so that's a very good question. There is no consensus on this. And so we don't know who's going to audit the auditors. I mean, if you listen to the EEOC, so when they had their meeting, they were talking about the potential of them actually certifying auditors. So that's in the works. In the EU, there's going to be a different set that will certify. And so what we have done is I'm purposefully not focusing on any one particular framework or legal regime. I'm focusing on what I think are sort of evergreen skills that every algorithm auditor is going to need. And Jihao can talk if he wants to about what he thinks about this. So there are basically 5 core areas that I see. So the 5 core areas are algorithms, AI, and machine learning. You have to, so this is one of the courses. This one actually is available now. You have to understand the technical aspects. You don't have to be a machine learning engineer, but you do need to have enough knowledge to understand the difference between supervised and unsupervised learning, or natural language processing and what it takes to do natural language processing, object detection versus classification of images. I mean, you have to understand the language of the modern machine learning techniques. What are transformers? How do they work? How are they different, let's say, than other neural networks? And because there's risk there depending on the different tools. And so you have to know enough to be able to recognize the risk and ask the right questions. And so that's one area. It's the technical bit that a lot of people are afraid of, but I think that there's no getting around actually understanding to a certain level what the algorithms are actually doing, how they're using data, and how they could go wrong. And so that's one core area. And I won't go into that anymore because I've talked about it before in the past. It is important. The other core area, which is, again, independent of regulation and independent of, let's say, auditing standards, is algorithmic risk and impact assessments. Those are going to be required pretty much everywhere. And all the organizations that we talk to internally were requiring these sorts of assessments. And so there are some pretty standard ways of doing these assessments that are fairly general, that don't, there's many different ways. Like there are human rights impact assessments, there are environmental impact assessments. There are lots of different ways these types of assessments can be done. But I think there's a pretty clear sort of generalized way of approaching algorithmic risk and impact assessments. This is at least from our point of view, having done many of them now, which can be, let's say, brought back into a more simplified version if you have to do things quickly or something. But there is kind of there's a kind of checklist that you have to get to if you want to actually do a decent job with this. And so that's the second one, being able to understand these, because the audits will require us to assess how other people are doing with these risk and impact assessments. It's not necessarily that the auditor needs to do it themselves, but they need to understand what good looks like and what insufficient looks like. And I think being able to ask the critical questions, they have to have some background and actually go through some case studies and ideally actually do some of these. Then there's AI governance and risk management. And so this is a catch-all for essentially a lot of the stuff that was in our report, but this is general techniques for governance and risk management. So things like accountability, looking at the regulatory landscape, what are the risk management frameworks? There's, for instance, model risk management. ISO has risk management frameworks, and now they have some that are specific to AI. NIST, of course, has the more recent one that's gotten a lot of attention, different transparency standards. So this is a pretty critical component. You need to know how these different mechanisms and AI governance and risk management, all the tools in the toolbox, you have to know what they are, how they work roughly, or how they're supposed to work, and how you might assess how a company is doing in those. Here's the one that's probably more scary than the AI one. And this is the one where I see the biggest, even talking to data scientists, this is the one where I see the biggest gap, is the actual technical testing for bias, things like bias, accuracy, and just the statistics of AI testing. So this might be, if any of you read like the fairness, accountability, like the FACT community's papers, that it's that kind of sort of things like fairness metrics, things like testing for bias in algorithms, looking for potential imbalances or biases in data sets or outcomes. This is a big area that I think a lot of people are missing, even the data scientists. And you don't have to be a data scientist to be able to get enough information to be able to ask the right questions. Let me check. I got some questions here. Okay. All right. So the question is, do you think the skill level is too high for a single person to conduct an AI governance audit effectively? Could technical AI and business governance people work together as an alternative? Yeah, this is a really good question. I think absolutely there has to be teams. So there has to be cross-functional teams. And so for all of these things, this is a baseline level. So this is like, these are meant to be like kind of 2 weeks of intensive study to get a sort of up to a benchmark of what we think is necessary. But you don't have to be a specialist in any of these, but you do need specialists in kind of all of these working with you. And so when we do audits, for instance, we have a whole team. We have a lead auditor, someone who is overseeing everything and is ultimately responsible. We have sort of what we call on-the-ground auditors, but I'm sure there are different names for them. The ones who are in individual sections who have these different specialties: a technical person, somebody who's really focused on governance, another person who's really focused on risk assessment. We have an oversight function, people that are looking over our shoulders and making sure that we're doing the right thing. All of them have different expertise in all of these areas. And so you don't have to be an expert. So I do not think it's realistic for a single person to have all of these at the right level. I think there are people that do, but it's at like a really high level. I think there are people that have it at the level that we are providing here, at the level that we are preparing to teach. There are people that have at that level, and that's a really versatile person that can kind of do a lot of things and specialize maybe in one thing over another thing. But to be an expert at all of these areas is unreasonable. Like, I don't think it's possible, actually. I don't think, not that it's possible. I don't think it's reasonable to ask to have a single person do all of this at the highest level. Okay, so the final one, so the last one was by the statistical testing one. That's going to be the most technical, even more so than the AI. That will be the most technical, where you're going to have to understand a little bit about statistics, knowing when things are not statistically significant and testing was not appropriate or needs to be more robust. I don't think you need to be a mathematician or even have a super strong math background to do it. I think you do need to have a handle on statistics, a fairly good handle on statistics, and then with some learning, you can get to the point where you can understand when something is teetering on the edge of not being appropriate statistically. And the final one is algorithm auditing and assurance, and this is the one that is very specific to auditing. It's not a subject matter in and of itself. It is the work of actually doing the auditing. So it's things like, what's the difference between audit assurance and assessment? What are the independence requirements? What are audit procedures? What is audit evidence? What are the opinions that we give? How do we assess audit risk? What kind of documentation do we need to keep? And I can show you like the normative standards that we use at BABL, but we're going to be a lot more broad than this and cover the broad categories while pointing at individual specific standards as examples. But here that these are the standards that we look to when we've kind of packaged the way that BABL does audits and what are the sources of truth that we have to go to if we have questions or gray areas that we have to deal with. But we're going to be talking more generally about the process. And here's where we'll actually do, on all of these, we plan on having hands-on activities to train our people who haven't done some of these, like a risk assessment, to actually do a risk assessment with a team, with us together. And for here, we'll also go through an example, a case study. There are case studies in all of them. This one will have case study of actually, you've gotten documentation from an organization. We need to evaluate this against criteria, look at the evidence. How do we go and verify claims and that sort of thing? And so this is one that is pretty critically important, but it is it's most specific to AI auditing and the least transferable to just generally working with a company. Okay, so these things we're launching these. And so I'm going to be putting this together over the next couple of weeks with my team, trying to figure out exactly when, how, but it's probably going to launch in May. And we'll probably do one course at a time. And so I'll keep people informed if they're interested in this. It's going to be a certificate program where there'll be a certificate of completion for completing it. People who are working with us or either contract or staff will get certified. It'll be a certification where we're actually going to give them an exam and there'll be an exit interview. Other people will just take it and complete it. And there will still be quizzes and work that gets evaluated, but it won't be a full-fledged certification. We probably will open up the full-fledged certification to some of our partner firms that we have relationships with, and that includes like some groups in For Humanity that might be doing these audits, and we know them, and we might part with them. So if you work with a firm that does this sort of thing that you think might be able to be a partner firm, you can also contact me. In all cases, you can contact me and let me know if you're interested in this. Let me check the last couple of questions. We are exactly out of time. So let me see if there's any quick questions I can. What are the minimum requirements on a team setup of auditors? So legal, technical, ethical, and domain experts. Okay, That's good. I think the minimum, so there has to be a technical person. I don't think there's any way of getting around at least having one technical person. We also have people, legal background, lawyers working with us. We have ethicists working with us, and we contact people if we need it with domain experts. So I think what you've listed is actually pretty good, like a legal person, a technical person, ethical, but ethical doesn't have to be an ethicist. It could be some other social scientist who has done a lot of work. It doesn't have to be somebody who has a PhD in philosophy. Let's put it that way. It has to be just somebody who understands the ethical frameworks really well that might be assessed. And then a domain expert, yeah, you definitely need that, especially if you're going to branch out into a domain that you don't have personally expertise in. You definitely want to bring somebody who understands that. So I have another question. Is it complementary to For Humanity trainings? Absolutely. So what For Humanity does is they have certifications on their certification schemes. So For Humanity comes up with subject matter criteria for and certification schemes to audit against for like a particular law, like EU AI Act or New York City, or you name it, GDPR in the UK. And you get training on that certification scheme when you go to For Humanity. What we're doing, because we're practitioners, we are training people in the actual doing of a lot of these things and the auditing procedure itself. So these are complementary. These are things that are not necessarily covered by For Humanity training. These are people who literally want to go in and actually do the audits. You need more than just understanding the criteria. You need to be able to evaluate effectively all the evidence. You need to be able to understand what's sufficient. You need to be, importantly, you need to understand how to recognize risk in an audit engagement. And so that's another critical issue. Let me see. We're going over time. So if people have to run, I don't feel bad for you. You can just jump off. I won't mind. Okay. Is a comp? Okay. Yes, thanks. Oh, can I share my email? Yeah, let me share my email in the Q&A. Actually, can I do that? Host, that's for hosts and panelists. Let me go to everyone and Shea Brown at. There's my email. So if you want to email me, you can feel free to email me there. All right, everyone. Thank you. Sorry for going long. Sorry for the rambling, but thank you so much for sticking through to the end. If you were watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're listening to this on a podcast, thank you for listening. And I'll see everybody next week on Lunchtime Babbling.